They were used to being big brother. They were the ones that would talk and hold stuff above BYU players of, hey, you'd be better off here. And now that that's changed, they hate it and it scares them and they're crying. There's a whole different vibe going on, and I can't help but just like that this is where we're at.
Hello and welcome to the Aptive podcast studio. This is the Loyal Cougars podcast where we talk about what you, the fans, are talking about. I'm your host, Jake Edmonds, alongside Tosh Mackintosh. Tosh, how was your weekend?
Fabulous. Great weekend.
Fantastic weekend, especially since Richie Saunders announced that he's coming back to BYU. Technically, he never left, but in this day and age with the transfer portal and with NIL and potentially the NBA draft, there was kind of uncertainty of whether or not he would come back. What does that do now to this team?
I mean, it helps us tremendously. I think one of the keys to college sports in the current environment is you need to get your best players back. Continuity, get old, stay old, any of those mantras. Richie was the key of that. He was our best player last year, and he had some eligibility. We had to have him back.
Yeah, and he may not be the best player, at least like the most athletic, physically gifted player. He may not even score the most points, although I would potentially argue maybe he will. But this was a good point made on Cougar Board. Mr. Sandman said, Richie may not have the brightest spotlight, but he is the most important piece to the season. His motor, his experience, his professionalism, as you said, all will benefit with him on the team, and all will be better. And, it's the same as I don't think we really appreciated Richie coming as much as we should have, Richie coming back last year. But he was the glue guy, right? And I think he can still fill that kind of glue guy role. There's a lot to be said about a team where there's a lot of new pieces coming in. Dawson Baker's back, Boscovich is back, and Richie's back. Kate is back. But you look at AJ,
Canard
Davis they just brought in. We'll talk about Canard Davis.
Diamande.
Rob Wright. Yeah, Diamande. A lot of new guys, right? And there's going to be some growing pains as we saw last year. Granted, hopefully the pre-conference schedule is somewhat easy, but probably not as easy as last year. And so there will be some period for them to gel. But I think Richie coming back, not only is he, potential NBA talent guy, but he's a glue guy that BYU needed to have.
For sure. He's the most proven that we have on this team. And that means something. He's been in the big moments. He has delivered in a lot of intense big moments. We needed this guy.
Yeah. Now the question is, was it ever in doubt? I know the NBA was a potential for him. He's been comped to guys like Alex Caruso. I still think he could make it to the NBA, but was it ever really in doubt that he was coming back to BYU?
Yeah, I think so, is the short answer. Bigger on that is, for one, it's key to point out him and his family have been BYU fans a long, long time. They are BYU people, and that means something. At the same time, he was really close to leaving last year, and then he came back and had a fabulous season. But in the current NIL environment, no one wants to feel like they are getting ripped off. And at the end of the season, he set a dollar amount to BYU. And from what I heard, it was 1.2 to 1.5, but closer to the 1.2 range. And everyone was kind of happy with that. But then all of a sudden, what people thought was the market value, just the lid blew off that.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, BYU started paying some guys coming in a lot more than that. BYU had some players leaving. Dallin Hall, we'll talk more on that later, that left and got a lot more than Richie had just agreed to. And I like Dallin Hall, but Richie's proven value and market value to a team is at a different stratosphere. And Richie, if he would have went to the open market, would have got a lot more money, a lot more money. And so then what I heard from a few people that became the situation is Richie, again, was willing to give BYU kind of the BYU discount, but he's like, I still need to be paid closer to market value. I want to be paid the second most on this team. So AJ number one, but Richie felt like fair market was he at least needed to be the second most. And then that had a few moving parts, and it took a while. It wasn't the fact that he didn't announce until the end of last week, it did mean something because there was some stuff going on behind the scenes. I don't fault him at all. I want players to play for BYU and be happy and feel like they are getting valued and that it's a fair transaction. And I think we got there in the end.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, I think Richie always wanted to come back to BYU. He was willing to even make some concessions, I think, for BYU. But, it was just as much about the money as it should be, right, in this day and age with NIL as anything else. And I think that brings up a good point with Dallin because there's kind of this mentality of like Dallin should have stayed and should have, played on this, Final Four team, potential Final Four team, and he would have been a legend and he would have been known as a Cougar great. And that's all great. I think that's like, a fine mentality to have if you're a fan. In fact, this is a post by Timo Sabe, I guess is what it is, on Cougar Board. He says, I know the ship has passed. I think he means sailed. But he said, I wish Dallin Hall would have stuck around. He could have been celebrated as a solid contributor to a possible BYU Final Four team. I think that would have meant more to a solid true blue LDS RM kid from Utah than playing a few more extra minutes in Virginia where he has no ties or Dallin Hall fans. I'm no athlete, but that opportunity would mean the world to me with or without money. Priceless. And again, like I just think, fans if you put yourself in that situation where, you're either making $400,000 or $500,000 at BYU, and granted, that's still a lot of money. Like I'd love to make $400,000 in a year, $500,000 in a year. But compare that to what he's making at Virginia. And not only that, but like if he stays at BYU, yes, he can be a contributor for a Final Four team. Yes, he can get backup minutes to a Rob Wright and play 15 minutes a game or whatever, 12 minutes a game and contribute for a team that he grew up, watching and loving and wanting to play for. But when you want to get to the NBA, you need minutes. You need minutes on at least a P4 caliber team to showcase your value. And that wasn't going to happen at BYU. And I think you told me off air that when he told Kevin Young, hey, I want more money, Kevin was like, go get the bag. Like, go get it. Like, go get paid, right? And, I think it's just kind of short-sighted or like more of a fan mentality to be like, he should have stayed and been a legend at BYU. It's like he's going to go get money. Like he wants to go to the NBA. Like he's got to think long-term for himself.
Absolutely. He's got 1 year left of eligibility to prove himself to whatever the pro is after that. NBA, he'd have to ball out, but he'll be a pro player in 12 months from now. And so he's got 1 more year to prove his value, and you got to put yourself in his shoes. As not this last season, but the season before, he really had this breakout year. But it's because Pope was putting the ball in his hand. He was the on-the-court leader every time he stepped on the court. He made the play or he passed it to someone who made the play. Last year, that was not his role. He had short, limited minutes where that was his role. But most of the time, when he was on the court, he was having to be the off-ball guard and let, Yegor do his thing. And credit to this BYU staff, they shot him straight on, hey, that's going to be the situation again next year. We're going to aggressively go after point guard number 1. And they did with Rob Wright. And Dallin didn't want to be the off-ball guard. He wanted to go somewhere where he would be able to be the court general. And again, the money does show how much a team values you and what sort of a role and value they think you're going to bring to the team. And so BYU also signaled to him that they were going to, I don't know the exact number. I know last year it was around 400, and I know they were talking similar this year. Then he goes to Virginia, and I've heard 1.7, I've heard 1.6, but it's somewhere through there. They paid him multiples of what BYU was going to pay him because they have a different role in mind, and credit to him. He's a guy that I'm cheering for. He gave incredible years to BYU. He won us some games, big ones too. Both sides should be happy with how it ended.
Yeah. And again, as Kevin Young said, go get the bag. Like, no one blames him for it. And I think BYU really fills his, because I think he left a little bit of a gap, right? Granted, you said that, Rob Wright kind of fills that point guard one role. They needed a second point guard, and they brought in a Canard Davis from Southern Illinois, and granted, Canard will probably be in the starting lineup, so he's not necessarily your backup point guard, although I do think that with rotations, you will see a lot of him. If they don't pick up another point guard, you'll see a lot of him probably at the one. But Canard Davis is a guy who, now granted, this was in the Missouri Valley Conference, and so like you have to kind of take it with a grain of salt, but he's a guy who can get to the rim. He scores a lot of points at the rim. He shoots the ball well from three. I think he's like a 37% three-point shooter from three. Most of those shots, by the way, come above the break. So you put him in the corner where a guy like Mag, who typically, historically struggled with three-pointers, you stick him in the corner, he starts making them. You do the same thing with Canard. He's going to be like a 40+% three-point shooter. Now, granted, he's not going to take all of his shots from the corner, but I'm just saying he was a 37% three-point shooter, mostly above the break. So he's a good shooter. He's a great passer. He can distribute. He scores well off the screen, which is, I think, BYU's strength, right? You're going to see a lot of pick and rolls from Keita. So he's great off the screen. He's also a great free throw shooter, 76%. So you take out a guy like Dallin Hall, you bring in a guy like Canard Davis, I don't think you're really missing a beat, right?
This team's stacked. There's no other way around that. He fills that goal. There's that gap somewhat. There's still some gap there, though. He's not a pure point guard, which last year we had two of those. I would love for BYU going forward to kind of fill in the roster with a point guard number two. I think is probably the highest pressing thing. We also need another proven big. Yep. That Foose, the loss of Foose, I think people are forgetting about how he was a big contributor when we put him in. Right now, we don't have another big that when we put in as a proven contributor. I love Boscovich, but he was off and on.
Well, it's Statton's raw, right? So it's
correct.
He's capable. He's got the size, although he's underweight. He's just not proven either. He's a freshman. So
yep.
Yeah, exactly. Those are the two roles they need. They've got a lot of these combo guards. They need a point guard. But again, like I do think like Rob's going to play 32 minutes a game potentially, right? And so like backup point guard can really be by committee in my opinion.
Yeah.
I don't know if they need a true
Baker
point guard.
can play it some.
Exactly.
We saw Saunders bring the ball up.
We saw Mag bring the ball up.
Correct.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think with what Kevin Young is doing with his rotations, I think he can make it work, even if they don't pick up another guy. Now, it sounds like they are still looking for a point guard.
Yeah.
So,
they have 4 or 5 scholarships still left, which is really intriguing. You know? So.
But it's crazy to think that, like, they still have more to do. In my opinion, they have probably the best starting lineup in the country. Maybe Houston, right, with who they've picked up from high school. We got AJ. They got like 2 guys in the top, or at least 2 McDonald's All-Americans. So Houston's going to have a pretty stacked lineup too. I think Sharp comes back as well, if I'm not mistaken.
And I mean, Kansas is stacked as well too. Yeah. It's like there's 3 Big 12 teams that are, but BYU is in the conversation, and there's a legit argument. We may have the best starting 5 in the entire country game 1 next year. My big question mark is just defense. That's half of the game. And we have Richie, who we know can defend and plays with a lot of intensity on defense. AJ, funny enough, the freshman coming in is, I think, the second most proven defender we have, in that he, at these big tournaments, is willing, in an AAU environment where a lot of guys don't play defense, he cares about defense, and he wins all defensive team or defensive MVP at a lot of these. AJ can defend. Now, outside of that, we have a lot of really good athletes. Obviously, Keita, that guy will defend. But we have a lot of proven athletes coming into the program that I'm not sure what their commitment to defense is, and that's going to be really interesting to watch.
This episode is brought to you by Aptive. Aptive believes that every home should be enjoyed. They tailor their pest control treatment plans to target pests when and where they're most active. Plus, if you see pest activity between treatments, Aptive will return to take care of the problem at no additional cost. It's their way of making sure every customer is satisfied and every pest is controlled. If pests stay away, Aptive is why. Visit AptivePestControl.com/loyalcougars or call 844-966-4787 and mention this promotion to get your initial treatment for just $29. That's AptivePestControl.com/loyalcougars or call 844-966-4787. Terms and conditions apply. Get home field advantage with Aptive. Looking to get your brand in front of BYU's most engaged fans? The Loyal Cougars podcast and Cougar Board are your perfect match. Cougar Board is the largest online community of BYU fans with thousands of posts every day. The Loyal Cougars podcast is the official podcast of Cougar Board, and we have sponsorship opportunities available for both the podcast and the site. Contact us at sponsorships@loyalcougars.com, and we'll help your message hit home with the Cougar faithful. Again, that's sponsorships@loyalcougars.com. Okay, so let's shift gears now. We're going to talk about football. It seems like we should be talking about football way more now than basketball, but we're still talking about basketball just because there's so much news still going on. But I think the biggest story, at least locally last week, was the claims of tampering, right?
Yeah.
And it's such a hot topic because it's so polarizing. And there were two camps. There was the camp of Utah fans saying BYU fans were tampering with three of their players, meaning representatives of BYU, whoever that was, were reaching out to players or representatives of players, Smith Snowden being one of them, to get them to enter the transfer portal where they could then, give them an offer and have them sign. That's tampering, right? That's tampering the NCAA. The argument against that is A, it either didn't happen, or B, everyone does it. And so, for Utah to open up that can of worms, it could come back to bite them. And here's what I'll say about this whole situation. And I tweeted about this, if Utah truly believes that BYU is tampering, and I'm not saying they're not, like they could very well be tampering. If Utah truly believes that, why wouldn't you just report it to the NCAA?
Yeah. Well, the short answer is because
I know the answer. It's a rhetorical question, but yes, go ahead.
Well, there's two. One is, what evidence do they have? I don't think that the people talking to people that know Utah players are actual BYU representatives. I think that's part of it. Secondly is Utah, if what they're saying BYU did is illegal, Utah has the same dirt all over their hands.
Yeah.
Like, do you think the Fanos went without people around Utah talking to them? No. Do you think even Caleb Lohner, do you think he went there to play football without there being some outside communication that, hey, you should come here and play football?
Francis Bernard. I mean, you look historically, like I'm sure, and I'm not saying Francis was tampered with. I'm just saying
he didn't go there not knowing that was an option.
Absolutely.
Like when he told BYU he's entering the portal.
Absolutely. There has to be some form of communication before they enter the portal. Otherwise, why would they do that? I mean, granted they can come back out of the portal and return to the team, but at that point, like, there's a stain on him, right? There's this like mentality of like, oh, he's already halfway out the door. He's entered the transfer portal one time. Now, granted, like Richie and Dallin did that, and they came back and they were still revered. But there's this like perception that if you enter the transfer portal, like, you're not sold, you're not bought in. Sorry, you're not bought in on the team. And I think players want to avoid that as much as possible. Like, they want to be on the good side of their coaches as much as possible. So here's my kind of take on this. And the reason why I asked this rhetorical question is because they're not going to report them because, again, it either didn't happen or it didn't happen in the way that they could report it, where the NCAA would actually like enforce anything, or B, they would be opening up that can of worms. I mean, they could, if they reported BYU to the NCAA, BYU would turn right around and report them back, or any other team could turn right around and report them back. And so like, that's why you're never going to see this, official reporting of tampering because of one of those two things. And so to me, it's like it was very calculated, the timing of it, and the fact that there were two like kind of pseudo, I don't want to like diminish their roles, but like pseudo reporters. I think Bartle's more official, KSL, like he's more like recognizable platform. Markham's, I'm sure he's great at what he does, but his platform is Ute Zone, right? It's not like
He's lost his credentials with Utah before and things.
I didn't know that. And honestly, I actually didn't realize Utah even gave credentials to
like a Ute zone.
Blogs. Yeah, I mean, they're fan blogs, right? Like, I'm not trying to diminish these guys' role because I was there too, right? Like, I was a fan. I wrote for a blog. Like, I've done this. But we didn't have credentials. Like, as a podcast, we don't have credentials. We're fans, right? Like, that would be like giving credentials to my dad, right? It's just he's a fan. Like, he's just because you write for a blog. Anyway, so that's my point. Is I'm surprised that Utah gave him credentials to begin with, and then going back to the fact that he and Bartle, and then I think the owner of Ute Zone or the whoever runs it.
There was a third guy that was named Sorensen. Dan Sorensen. He had the same name as the famous safety.
Yeah. But I think he's tied with Ute Zone. I didn't do a whole lot of digging into these guys, but three guys that aren't like, Bartle's great. But they're not like the Tribune. They're not the Deseret News. They're not KSL.com. It's KSLSports.com, which I think is, it's fine. Sorry, I'm doing a really bad job of like making these guys sound credible. They're fine. I'm just saying, it's interesting that just those three guys, I guess, were the ones that kind of leaked it as if like they heard from the exact same source at the exact same time in probably a group chat or whatever. It's just like this echo chamber and that became Bible, right? Like that became what was the news of the week. And I just think it was a very calculated way for Utah to get that news out and to keep their guys.
Oh, I loved it for the reasons you mentioned. Like the reason that Utah fans were screaming and melting down on Twitter, and the reason why three like people that just their whole social media is about Utah talked about it at the same time is because they were scared. And it really comes down to they were used to being Big Brother, and that they were the ones that would talk and hold stuff above BYU players of, hey, you'd be better off here. And now that that's changed, they hate it, and it scares them, and they're crying. And there's a whole different vibe going on, and I can't help but just like that this is where we're at.
It's crazy to think. Like honestly, I didn't even know the official like rules for tampering. Literally like 3 weeks ago, I was like, does the NCAA even have like enforceable rules about tampering? And I was naive to think that they may not, but it's because BYU's never been accused of this stuff, right? Like they've never really had that type of leg up on anybody, including Utah. Really the only like draw to BYU is that you can come and be part of a great culture, with LDS community and the honor code, and your parents are going to love it because you're not going to get in trouble, and you get to play football, and there's obviously other draws, like you can start for a pretty widely recognized team with a lot of fans, but that draw is like it's just not it's pretty hollow when you compare to like a Michigan or even in the last
Power 5 versus Independence. It was a different platform.
Absolutely. And so like I'm sure BYU still tampered, but it wasn't to the point that it felt like threatening to other teams. They were like, yeah, you can have our, backup tight end or whatever. Like, we're not going to report you for that because we do the same thing to you, but we grab your starting running back or whatever. Like, I don't think we really ever heard of it with BYU as much because they weren't a threat to anybody. And now that they are, especially to their crosstown rivals or cross-state rivals, it's now becoming news, at least from an unofficial sources say perspective, and it's great. I think it's great as BYU fans to hear.
And it comes from a place of they do not want BYU to be above them. That's so much of the Utah fan identity. And the reason I say this is Utah lost 2 players to other teams last week. They lost their wide receiver 1. They lost their 4-star who looked like wide receiver 2. But they didn't go to BYU, so it's like crickets about it on Twitter.
No one cares.
But just the idea that there was players considering going to BYU, they're just lighting their houses on fire. And it's like, man,
And none of them went. None of them transferred, and they're spiking the football over it. Like, congratulations, you retained your players. Like, no one cares. So anyway, it's great to hear. Now, there was another big event last week, which was the NFL draft. And probably the biggest story of the draft was former BYU great Caleb Lohner going in the seventh round. Right?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty wild. Out of all of Utah and all of BYU, him being the only player drafted, and a guy that his whole career was mostly, was as a basketball player. And then last year he fit a role, but it was a fairly small role. And so good for him. And it does show this is the same thing that we feel with basketball a lot with Yegor and others is we got to remember these pro sports are drafting off potential. And Caleb's height, size, and off-the-charts athleticism, that's why he was drafted. His pro day, he put enough on film that he could play football, and then his pro day shocked people that now the guy's drafted.
Well, and the best part is he doesn't have to shoot the three-pointer in the NFL. I love how ESPN, by the way, of all the film that they had of him playing at BYU, Baylor, Utah basketball, Utah football, they went with his Wasatch Academy highlights from high school. It's just to show, like, this is a guy that played. They were like, is he the next big, former basketball player turned tight end? You know, like the who was it that
Antonio Gates back in the day,
and So they were like, is he the next, basketball player turned, phenomenal athlete tight end? And they went with his basketball highlights. Okay, so that really wasn't the story of the day, as we all know. I was kind of joking. Shedeur Sanders falling to the 5th round. And, John Haddo, who's pretty well known on Cougar Board, his take was that he says, I think BYU's defensive scheme in the Alamo Bowl was a major factor in Shedeur falling. Jay Hill gave him about 14 different looks in the first half of the game, and Sanders was quoted as saying he was confused and did not know where BYU was coming from. He was sacked multiple times, blah, blah, blah. He says, I'm sure he'll be drafted tonight. And I think he actually posted this before the 2nd round, so he was wrong. Some team will take a chance on him, but falling out of the 1st round will cost him a lot of money and pride. So basically he's saying, he thinks that BYU played a big factor in Shedeur Sanders falling. Is that giving too much credit to BYU?
Yes. I had 3 or 4 different friends text me similar stuff of, BYU really cost Shedeur a lot of money. And I don't think so. What was that game a net negative for him? Yes.
Yeah,
but
it didn't help.
Over a whole career of film and what he's put on film, that's not the biggest ingredient. You look at a lot of these quarterbacks drafted had terrible games. Every single one of them. Again, they are drafting off of potential, and I don't know. I'm not an insider in the Shedeur Sanders world in any means, but from what I can gather, his interviews, I think the media circus that follows him, some of which is not his fault, some of it the Sanders are behind, some of the comments of how involved his dad was going to be if it wasn't going well. I think those were bigger ingredients that teams didn't want to take the chance on him rather than one bad game in a long career.
Yeah, and I just don't think Shedeur was that good. I think he benefited from a system that threw the ball a lot. They put a lot of athletic receiver. He had the Heisman winner on his team, in addition to 2 or 3 other NFL. A
lot of receivers
dudes.
Got drafted.
I know. So he had a pretty bad offensive line, and so you can give him some credit for eluding pressure and throwing outside the pocket. Before the BYU Colorado Bowl game, I actually I gave some pretty high praise to Shedeur because he was so good under pressure at taking care of the football. He didn't throw interceptions all season. And granted, he threw a few against BYU, but he was, he had his strengths, but I just don't think he was like a 1st round caliber quarterback like the media, ESPN were hyping him up to be. And I think it's almost like a result of his dad being so, obviously we know Colorado is so hyped up because of Deion Sanders. If Deion Sanders ever leaves Colorado, they're a bottom dweller in the Big 12 again, and they're not being talked about by anybody in the national media. They're only being talked about because of Deion. And I actually think Deion probably helped Travis Hunter's case to be a Heisman winner.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, Travis is great. Like, Travis is a great athlete. I think he probably deserved it. Like, two-way player, whatever. But Dion being at Colorado has put a spotlight on that team in a way that overhypes every athlete on that team, including his own son.
Especially his own son.
To the point where you've got Mel Kiper crashing out on ESPN because he thinks Shedeur should go in the first round, and he's just what's the word? Incensed, not incest. That'd be bad. That this guy that everyone's projecting to go so high, that he himself projected to go so high. By the way, Mel Kiper's not a scout, right? He talks to scouts, and he could have gotten bad information from scouts, probably trying to
throw teams
inflate off. Trying to inflate Shedeur's value to get other people to draft him, right? They like, hey, we want Jackson Dart, so we're gonna tell everyone we want Shedeur so that somebody else can pick Shedeur and we get Jackson Dart. Like that, I think that was probably at play, but I think ESPN overinflated his value from the beginning, and it hurt him in the draft.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, I think he's great, but that could be because the media tricked me. There's a part of it too. It's fun. I have become a fan of Big 12 players, and so I hope that he does well, and I think his accuracy and his arm, and he's freaky athletic, although he doesn't run out of the pocket much. I think he has those things. I think, though, you hit the nail on the head. Media, in general, they talk about what gives them clicks and views. And he gave them such clicks and views that I think it overinflated him, but it also scared off teams. And time will tell. I mean, his story is just beginning. It's going to have a real interesting chapter, either direction it goes now. But wild weekend for him.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great spot to take a flyer on him, right, in the 5th round. Like, I think it's kind of a no-lose situation for him and for his team now, because if he struggles, he's just he's the backup quarterback, which BYU's had plenty of backup quarterbacks in the NFL. Like, it's a great job to have. I do feel bad that with the prank call. So someone prank calls, for those that didn't see on social media. He had his draft party live streamed, I think on Twitch. I think it was a live stream. I don't think it was posted after the fact. That would have been pretty cruel to post it after the fact. I think it was live streamed. Shedeur answers the phone, and it's a guy claiming to be from the Saints. I think like the GM or coach from the Saints. And it ended up being, I think it was like
the defensive coordinator, the Falcons kid.
Yeah.
Crazy.
How does he get his number? Like, how?
Well, he said that he got it off his dad's iPad is what the thing came out.
Insane. And so, like, what are the repercussions for that? But people find it funny. I guess it was, it could, I don't know. Like, we'll look back on it and probably think it's funny. But, like, in the moment, this is this kid's, like, future. He's losing out on millions of dollars. And to get his, hopes up for a phone call from the NFL, from an NFL representative, Saints representative, like, he had to have been feeling super excited at that moment, and then it just drops like a rock.
It was cruel. It was absolutely cruel, and in a lot of ways, I actually think it may help Shedeur's brand. That I think a lot of people are going to be cheering for him because of what he went through last weekend, with just the embarrassment of everyone feels like, oh man, how awful would it be to watch yourself drop like that, and then to have that sort of a call. Yeah, it was a bad, cruel.
Yeah. So, all right, shifting gears one more time. We're going to go to, hopefully we get kind of a weekly segment or a regular segment where we're going to pull up some of the worst Utah fan posts of the week or of the month. And ironically, our first one is going to come from BYU's athletic director. Utah's athletic director, Mark Harlon, who, as we know, is wildly popular among Utah fans and BYU fans as well. But it comes after a post made by a pretty notorious Utah fan named Utah Pig Bus. And I actually followed Utah Pig Bus for a long time. And, his account is very polarizing. It's very,
it's wild.
He made a pretty inappropriate comment about Jordan.
Multiple, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, he's just very brash. And not the type of account you would want to support if you're the athletic director of a school. And that's exactly what happened. So Utah Pig Bus posted, "I'm back." I guess he had left. I didn't realize he had left.
Yeah.
But he says, "I'm back." And so Mark Harlan tweets him and he says, "Post-portal pig is back." And BYU Burner, at BYU Burner 1 on X said, is Pig Bus Harlan's burner? That's, have we ever seen him in the same room at the same time? Or did Harlan forget to switch his burner before posting this? Because having your school's AD not just acknowledge but promote one of the school's most vile burner accounts is wild.
Yeah,
So,
because in the context, Pig Bus was saying homophobic things. He said a lot of racist things. He said just very vulgar things all over the place. And then in the midst of that, he says, "I'm back."
Yeah.
And then Harlan then quote tweets him, and it's like, oh my gosh, like what is happening?
Yeah.
And Harlan already, I mean, people like to tease that all Utah fans are what Pig Bus is kind of a caricature of. They have that part of their fan base. They have a lot of very conservative, wholesome fans too, and that want professionalism out of their department and players and coaches. And so there's a lot of heat on Harlan already for a lot of stuff he's done over the last 12 months. Like, what a social snafu is wild.
Yeah, you go from, you go from the whole fiasco after the BYU game where he was no longer happy to be in the Big 12, already in hot water, to now. And, maybe Utah fans don't look at this and think any worse of him, but it's, at the very least, and he deleted it after the fact. So he was aware that it was a bad idea. At the very least, it's just not a great professional look from an athletic director who's already in pretty hot water with his fan base. So shout out to Mark Harlan for making our Utah post of the week. We'll try and keep that going, hopefully, for you guys. Tosh, thanks for joining.
It's a pleasure.
This is the Loyal Cougars podcast. I'm your host, Jake Edmonds, Tosh Mackintosh, joining me today. Please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Also head over to YouTube, like and subscribe, and hit the bell to get notifications for videos that we post every week. But until then, we'll see you next week.